Okay, so it was a really interesting discussion
Yeah,
this
it was.
morning about digital transformation in finance. So what were your key takeaways from that discussion?
So, a couple of things. I remember what Ian said. You have to be incredibly bold in some of these changes, right? What we learned in Diageo as well. You cannot take this lightly. You cannot tiptoe through this. You have to take a big, in some ways, a bet, right? Because you're going to put a lot of money behind it. There's a lot of resources that you throw behind it. But we do believe this will define the company of the future. And more importantly, I think if you don't do it, you're going to be left behind, right? I think business-wise, competitive-wise, but genuinely, from an employee experience point of view, you'll not be able to attract the talent. So for us, it's become very easy to say, this is it's become a must-do rather than and kind of a nice to have, make some changes. It's become a real part of our core strategy now across the business, across finance.
It's interesting that you say it's going to define the future for Diageo. So how far into the future are you planning?
So we tend to take a 3 to 5 year view because although that seems, actually it's a really useful guide because if you go too far into the future, technologies change so much, you end up probably putting in place systems that don't survive that long. You have to be medium term. So 3 to 5 is quite a good lens. We have a good sense of our business performance during that time. And then we can define, based on what we know of technology, and we know it's going to change, how the world should look like, how our system should look like, how our processes should look like in 3 to 5 years, right? So tricky, but very doable, I think, for most major corporates, yeah.
Yeah, I guess one of the secrets of success is remaining agile throughout.
Absolutely, right? Agility, and I think the other thing that's come through, interestingly, is being agnostic about technology. That sounds really strange for a digital strategy, and being agnostic of providers. So one of the biggest risks we have seen is if you get too attached to one particular solution, one particular expert advice that says you're going to go down this way, you can end up really cementing your structure, and therefore the agility goes away, right? So we thought, keep your strategy very clear, but be open to the fact that you may have to change a bank, right, or a provider or a system, and it should be able to work regardless of that, rather than be completely embedded into one particular solution. Right? So very, very kind of flexible solutions rather than rigid solutions, right? And that works for business changes as well, because we know our business will change over the next 3, 5, 10 years. You've got to be able to flex the systems easily to be able to navigate through that.
And is that a kind of an example of how Treasury needs to be more strategic as well?
It does. And I think, genuinely, there's a risk. You can be here and now, look at yesterday as being the guide and go, even think a couple of days ahead kind of thing, or a week ahead. You have to think years ahead. And genuinely, like I said, you have to define what systems, processes would look like, and that will then tell you what you need to do today kind of thing, rather than looking backwards kind of thing, right? So it's a very different lens. The last thing I would say is anything you do on digitizing or digital strategy, you have to simplify your business first. So one of the biggest learnings we had was, how do you simplify business processes end to end? Forget about what is treasury, what is finance, end to end. How can you centralize and standardize? Because if you could do that, any solutions that you put on top will work much better. Because if you have non-standardized processes, complex processes, decentralized key processes, very hard to digitize it. When you bring it all together and simplify it, standardize it, much easier to make an impact.
Yeah, and I guess that goes for data as well.
Absolutely, right? Because one of the worst things is you collect all these data in bespoke solutions, and then trying to then merge that together becomes an absolute nightmare, right? So if you have a centralized, we call it centers of excellence kind of thing, where they feed the right data into the data pool, much easier to then navigate through it, use it, analyze it, and more importantly, get value out of it.
Yeah, interesting. So I guess the final question for me is kind of, what have you achieved so far for Diageo? What are your big achievements?
So what we have done, maybe I'll start with that centralization, standardization. We now use one standard SAP instance across the globe, which is quite amazing, given that we operate in 180 countries. We have centralized a lot of our key processes, like it could be in Bangalore, in Budapest, in India, and we have now started to layer down those digitizing platforms onto those centralized solutions kind of thing, right? So it was a 2-3 step process, and we're genuinely now moving to user-friendly interface solutions. So every tool that an individual, an employee, customer, supplier touches, we're setting the standard. It should be like an app on your phone. Now, it may be slightly more complex, but we're saying that is the standard, so that approving an expense claim, a purchase order requisition, everything has to be that simple, right? Swipe and do rather than the old way of doing things. So we've started to do that. I think we're probably partway through that journey, but we are very clear what the end looks like, and we're quite excited what it looks like. Yeah.
Exciting times.
Yeah,
indeed.
it is. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
How have you found the event?
Loved it actually, and look, every time I come to this, one of the things I do take away is new ideas, new provocations, and I think it's hard to explain the value of these things and the networking that happens, because every time I speak to somebody, I get a different opportunity that I take back to the office kind of thing, right? And I think we should do this more often, and every time I do it, I walk away with new ideas. So I'm looking forward to the rest of it today as well. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.